Your niceness isn't a virtue. It's a prison you've built around yourself, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The narcissist in your life doesn't admire your kindness. They depend on it. While you're searching for the perfect way to communicate your needs, they're calculating exactly how to make you doubt those needs even exist. The inspirational quotes telling you to kill them with kindness are literally killing your spirit, your confidence, and your sense of reality. What no one has had the courage to tell you is that the nice approach isn't failing because you're not doing it well enough. It's failing because it cannot possibly work. The person you're tiptoeing around doesn't want your understanding. They want your compliance. Today, I'm offering you the red pill of relationship wisdom. The path to healing begins when you stop being nice and start being real. Life gives us choices every single day. Some choices bring us forward, others hold us back. But there's one choice many good people make that costs them everything: being nice to those who see kindness as weakness. You know what I'm talking about. That person in your life who takes and takes, who makes everything about themselves, who leaves you feeling drained and confused after every interaction. You keep being nice, hoping they'll change, hoping they'll finally appreciate your efforts, but they never do. Let me tell you something that might change your life. Some people aren't meant to be won over with kindness. Some people will see your niceness as an invitation to take more. I learned this lesson the hard way, as many of us do. Years ago, I had a business partner who always needed to be the star of the show. When things went well, he took all the credit. When things went poorly, suddenly it was our mistake, or more often, my mistake. I kept being accommodating, kept being nice, kept thinking, if I just show him enough respect and kindness, he'll start to reciprocate. 2 years later, I was exhausted. The business was suffering, and nothing had changed. That's when I realized something profound. My niceness wasn't an investment. It was a tax I was paying for someone else's ego. Here's the truth. Being nice to a narcissist is like pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour, it will never be enough. What does being nice to a narcissist actually look like? It's saying yes when you want to say no. It's apologizing when you've done nothing wrong. It's walking on eggshells to avoid their anger. It's excusing behavior you would never accept from anyone else. It's giving second chances that turn into third, fourth, and fifth chances. And the cost? Your time, your energy, your self-respect, your opportunities, your peace of mind, your authentic voice. These are treasures too valuable to waste on someone who can't appreciate them. Now, I'm not saying be unkind. Kindness is a virtue. But there's a world of difference between kindness and being a doormat. Kindness comes from strength and choice. Being nice to avoid conflict or in hopes of winning approval comes from fear. I want you to consider something. What if the energy you're spending trying to please someone who cannot be pleased was redirected toward your own growth? What if the mental space occupied by worrying about their reactions was filled instead with plans for your future? You see, the narcissist has a secret advantage. While you're busy trying to make them happy, they're busy thinking about themselves. While you're second-guessing your every word, they're pursuing their own interests without a second thought for yours. The most expensive real estate in the world isn't in New York or Tokyo or London. It's the space in your mind. And you're letting someone live there rent-free who doesn't even appreciate the property. I've spoken to thousands of people over the years, and I've noticed something interesting. The most successful people in business, in relationships, in life satisfaction, all have the ability to recognize when someone is taking advantage of their good nature, and they have the courage to stop it. This isn't about becoming cold or callous. It's about becoming wise. It's about recognizing that your kindness is a gift, not an obligation. And some people have lost the privilege of receiving that gift. Let me tell you about my friend Sarah. Sarah was the nicest person you'd ever meet. Always volunteering, always helping, always available. She had a colleague who would consistently dump work on her at the last minute, take credit for her ideas, and criticize her in front of others for 2 years. Sarah kept being nice. She'd stay late to finish the extra work. She'd smile and say, "No problem," when inside she was seething. One day, Sarah came to one of my seminars, and we talked about this exact issue. 6 months later, I ran into her again. She looked different, confident, energized, happy. I asked what had changed. "I stopped being nice," she said. "I started being fair to myself and to others." Sarah had learned to say, "I can't take on that project right now, and I'll need proper credit for that idea. And I'd appreciate it if you would address concerns privately rather than in team meetings." The interesting part, she didn't lose her job. She didn't become unpopular. In fact, she got promoted. Being nice had kept her stuck. Being fair to herself and others set her free. Here's another costly aspect of niceness toward narcissists. It teaches them that their behavior works. Every time you accommodate unreasonable demands, every time you accept an insincere apology, every time you pretend the hurtful comment didn't hurt, you're training them. You're essentially saying, "This behavior gets you what you want." Is that really the lesson you want to teach? The problem with continuously being nice to narcissists is that you eventually forget how to be authentic with anyone. You become so accustomed to managing other people's feelings, to walking on eggshells, to second-guessing yourself, that you lose touch with your own needs and desires. I've seen people who spent years catering to a narcissistic boss or partner. And when that relationship finally ended, they didn't even know what they wanted anymore. They had spent so long asking, "What will please this person?" that they'd forgotten to ask, "What will fulfill me?" That's the hidden tragedy. You don't just lose your time and energy to a narcissist, you can lose yourself. Now, you might be thinking, "But Jim, I was raised to be nice. It's part of my values to treat everyone with respect." I understand that. I respect that. But consider this. Respect doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Treating others well doesn't mean allowing yourself to be treated poorly. True respect, including self-respect, requires honesty, boundaries, and occasionally, difficult conversations. I once had a gentleman approach me after a seminar. He said, "Jim, I've been nice to my business partner for 15 years. I've covered for his mistakes, loaned him money he never repaid, listened to his problems for hours while he never asks about mine. But if I stop being nice, doesn't that make me just like him?" My answer was simple. The opposite of being overly nice isn't being unkind. It's being honest and fair. And the world needs more honesty and fairness, not less. Remember this. The narcissist's greatest weapon is your fear of being seen as not nice. Once you realize that being fair to yourself is more important than being seen as nice, their power over you begins to fade. So as we move into the next part of our discussion, I want you to ask yourself, what has your niceness cost you? What opportunities have you missed while catering to someone who wouldn't do the same for you? What parts of yourself have you silenced to keep the peace? And most importantly, are you ready to invest that precious time and energy back into yourself? Because the truth is, you can't change a narcissist, but you can change your response, and that makes all the difference. To change your approach, you first need to understand exactly what you're dealing with. Knowledge is power, and in this case, understanding the narcissist's playbook gives you the upper hand. Let me tell you something important. Narcissists are predictable. Yes, the very people who seem to constantly keep you off balance actually follow patterns so consistent you could set your watch by them. Once you recognize these patterns, you'll never be caught off guard again. The first thing to understand is that narcissists live in a different reality than you do. In your reality, relationships are about give and take, mutual support, shared experiences in their reality. Relationships are about what they can get, how they can look good, and who can serve their needs. I had a call once from a business owner who couldn't understand why his top salesperson was causing so much chaos in his company. "Jim," he said, "this guy brings in more revenue than anyone else, but he pits people against each other, takes credit for the team's work, and throws tantrums when he doesn't get his way. I've tried everything: bonuses, recognition, heart-to-heart talks. Nothing changes his behavior." I asked him a simple question. What if he's not trying to change? What if this behavior is working perfectly for him? There was silence on the other end of the line, then a quiet. "Oh, you see, we make a fundamental error when dealing with narcissists. We assume they want what we want: harmony, fairness, mutual growth. They don't. They want admiration, control, and to win at all costs. This isn't about judging them. It's about seeing clearly so you can make better choices. Let's break down the narcissist's playbook step by step. First, there's the charm offensive. Narcissists can be incredibly charming when they first meet you. They'll flatter you, seem intensely interested in you, mirror your interests and values. This phase feels amazing, like you've met someone who truly gets you. I remember meeting a potential business partner years ago who spent our first few meetings asking thoughtful questions about my philosophy, praising my work, and sharing seemingly vulnerable stories about himself. I was impressed by his emotional intelligence and felt we had a real connection. Later, I discovered every story he'd told me was strategically crafted to create exactly that impression. After the charm comes the testing phase. They'll make small requests to see how far you'll go to please them. They might forget their wallet at lunch, ask you to rearrange your schedule at the last minute, or share something in confidence and then check if you kept their secret. These tests may seem minor, but they're information-gathering missions. The narcissist is learning how easy you are to manipulate, how much you value the relationship, and how much discomfort you'll tolerate to keep the peace. Then comes the control phase. Once they know you value the relationship and want to keep them happy, the real agenda emerges. Suddenly you find yourself doing things you never thought you would, tolerating disrespect, making excuses for their behavior, isolating from people who express concern. Mark wrote to me about his experience with a narcissistic supervisor. "I used to pride myself on my integrity. Then I found myself lying to clients to cover for my boss's mistakes, working weekends because he couldn't manage his time, and distancing myself from coworkers who questioned his methods. I didn't recognize myself anymore." This is the insidious nature of narcissistic relationships. They don't just drain your energy. They can fundamentally change who you are. But the playbook doesn't stop there. When narcissists feel their control slipping, they have backup strategies. One of the most effective is called intermittent reinforcement. Imagine a slot machine. Why do people keep pulling the lever? Because sometimes they win, not always, not predictably, but just enough to keep them hoping the next pull will pay off. Narcissists operate the same way. They'll give you just enough of what you're seeking: approval, affection, respect, fairness, to keep you invested. One day they're impossibly difficult. The next they're surprisingly thoughtful. One week they're taking credit for your work. The next they're praising you publicly. This inconsistency keeps you confused, hopeful, and most importantly, engaged. You stay because you remember how good things can be and believe if you just find the right approach, things will return to that good state permanently. They won't. Another classic tactic in the narcissist's playbook is what psychologists call gaslighting, making you question your own perceptions, memories, and sanity. They'll deny saying things you clearly heard, blame you for problems they created, or insist you're overreacting to legitimate concerns. Lisa came to me after a decade in a relationship with a narcissistic partner. I used to be confident in my perceptions, she said. Now I record our conversations because I've been told so many times that I'm remembering things wrong. This is the toll these relationships take. You begin to distrust the one thing you should always be able to count on, your own experience of reality. Understand this. The confusion you feel is not accidental. It's strategic. Confused people are easier to control than confident people. There's a technique in the Narcissist's Playbook called moving the goalposts. You work to meet their expectations, and just when you think you've succeeded, the expectations change. The promotion they promised has new conditions. The apology they demanded isn't sincere enough. The effort you made isn't quite what they had in mind. This keeps you in a perpetual state of striving, never quite measuring up, always working harder for approval that's consistently just out of reach. And when all else fails, when their other tactics aren't working, narcissists resort to what's called the nuclear option, rage or collapse. The rage version involves intimidation, yelling, threats, dramatic accusations, anything to shock you into compliance. The collapse version involves self-pity, threats of self-harm, claims that you're abandoning them in their time of need. Both versions share the same goal, to make the issue about their feelings rather than their behavior. I worked with a CEO who couldn't understand why his executive team was so conflict avoidant. During our coaching sessions, I discovered that anytime a team member brought up concerns, he would either explode in anger or become deeply wounded. "How could you say that after all I've done for you?" he would ask, sometimes with tears in his eyes. His team had learned that honesty came with a high emotional price tag, so they stopped being honest. This is the invisible cost of accommodating narcissistic behavior. Truth becomes dangerous. Authenticity becomes risky. Your own needs become secondary to keeping the peace. Now, you might be wondering why intelligent, capable people get caught in these dynamics. The answer is both simple and profound. Because narcissists target the best people. They look for empathetic individuals who try to see the best in others. They seek out responsible people who won't abandon a commitment easily. They're attracted to successful, competent people whose capabilities they can leverage. Your best qualities, your loyalty, your willingness to see multiple perspectives, your capacity for forgiveness, your commitment to growth, these are precisely what make you valuable to a narcissist. The final element of the narcissist's playbook is perhaps the most painful: replacement. Once you've begun to set boundaries, once you're no longer providing the unconditional admiration they crave, they often start grooming your replacement. This could be a new employee, a new friend, a new partner, someone fresh who doesn't yet see the patterns. This serves two purposes. It secures them a new source of admiration, and it sends you a message that you're replaceable if you don't fall back in line. Understanding this playbook isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming wise. It's about recognizing that your compassion and goodness are being used against you by someone who simply doesn't operate according to the same values you do. So what do you do with this knowledge? You use it to free yourself from confusion. The next time you're dealing with a narcissist and feel bewildered by their behavior, remember, they're not confused. They're following a strategy that has worked for them countless times before. Their behavior will start to make perfect sense when you stop expecting them to act according to your value system and recognize they're acting according to their own. This understanding is liberating. It means the problem isn't that you're not nice enough, not patient enough, not forgiving enough. The problem is that you've been playing by rules they never intended to follow. As we move into the next section, remember this: you can't control their behavior, but you can control your response. And that's where your power begins. Now that you understand the narcissist's playbook, it's time to create your own strategy. And it all begins with one powerful concept: boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls. They're not about shutting people out. They're property lines that define where you end and others begin. They mark what's acceptable and what isn't. Most importantly, They protect what matters most: your time, your energy, your self-respect. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They think setting boundaries is an aggressive act. It's not. It's an act of self-care and ultimately an act of honesty. You see, when you consistently allow someone to cross your boundaries, you're telling a lie. You're saying, this treatment is acceptable to me, when it's not. You're saying, this behavior doesn't hurt me, when it does. Every time you fail to enforce a boundary with a narcissist, you abandon yourself. I worked with a talented writer named Michael, who had a narcissistic agent. This agent would call at all hours, make unreasonable demands, and take credit for Michael's successes for years. Michael answered every call, met every demand, and swallowed his resentment. "Why do you keep working with him?" I asked. "Because he's connected," Michael said. "He knows everyone in publishing." "And what does that connection cost you?" Michael paused. "My creativity, my peace of mind, my sleep, my family time. Are those things worth less than his connections?" That conversation led Michael to set his first boundary. He stopped answering calls after 6 p.m. He expected resistance, anger, even threats to drop him as a client. What actually happened surprised him. His agent adjusted. There were a few tests of the boundary, a few emergencies that weren't really emergencies, but Michael held firm. Within a month, the after-hours calls stopped completely. This illustrates something crucial. Narcissists will push against your boundaries, but they'll also respect strength. They may not like your boundaries, but they'll adapt to them if they have no choice. The key is consistency. A boundary enforced sometimes and abandoned other times isn't a boundary at all. It's a suggestion. And narcissists don't respond to suggestions. Setting boundaries requires courage. It requires being willing to face short-term discomfort for long-term gain. It means being prepared for what therapists call an extinction burst, a temporary escalation in bad behavior when the narcissist realizes their usual tactics aren't working. Think of it like a child having a tantrum in a grocery store. If the parent gives in, the child learns that tantrums work. If the parent holds firm, the child eventually learns that tantrums are ineffective. The narcissist's extinction burst works the same way. It's a test of your resolve. The most powerful boundaries are expressed simply and without emotion. "I'm not available to talk after 6 p.m. I won't continue this conversation if you're raising your voice. I need to see changes in behavior, not just hear promises." Notice there's no blame in these statements, no accusations. Boundaries aren't about controlling the other person. They're about clarifying what you will and won't accept. Healthy boundaries have consequences when they're violated. Those consequences aren't punishments. They're natural results of the violation. If someone repeatedly interrupts you in meetings, the consequence might be that you'll address your comments to others or schedule separate time with the decision maker. Consequences aren't threats. They're simply what happens next, stated clearly and enforced consistently. Remember this: your boundaries aren't up for debate, negotiation, or vote. You don't need anyone's permission, understanding, or approval to establish what's acceptable to you. Some of you might be thinking, but if I set boundaries, I might lose this relationship. That's possible. Not every relationship can survive the introduction of healthy boundaries. But ask yourself, what kind of relationship requires you to accept mistreatment to maintain it? As we move forward, remember that boundaries aren't just protective, they're informative. How someone responds to your reasonable boundaries tells you everything you need to know about their capacity for a healthy relationship with you. In our next section, we'll explore specific strategies for responding to narcissistic behavior that go beyond just setting boundaries. These practical approaches will help you maintain your dignity and effectiveness when dealing with narcissists in any area of life. Let's get tactical. Now that you understand the narcissist's playbook and the importance of boundaries, you need specific strategies for daily interactions. I'm going to share techniques that work in real-world situations. Whether you're dealing with a narcissistic boss, coworker, family member, or partner. First, master the art of the gray rock response. When a narcissist tries to provoke an emotional reaction, become as interesting as a gray rock. Keep your face neutral, your voice steady. Your responses brief and factual. No anger, no defensiveness, no visible hurt. Why does this work? Because narcissists feed on emotional energy. When you withhold that energy, you become a less appealing target. It's simple but remarkably effective. During a meeting, when a narcissistic colleague takes credit for your idea, instead of showing anger, simply state, "Thanks for bringing that up. As I mentioned when I introduced that concept last week, there are several factors to consider. No accusation, no emotion, just facts." Next, develop what I call strategic distance. This isn't about cutting people off completely. It's about creating space between you and their drama. Limit one-on-one time. Meet in public places. Bring a third party to meetings when possible. Document interactions in writing. This distance serves two purposes. It reduces their opportunities to manipulate you, and it provides witnesses or evidence if they try to distort reality later. Third, practice the broken record technique. When faced with pressure, manipulative questions, or attempts to cross your boundaries, calmly repeat your position without elaboration or justification. Can you finish this project over the weekend? Number, I'm not available to work weekends. But this is really important to the company. I understand, but I'm not available to work weekends. Everyone else is willing to put in extra hours. I understand, but I'm not available to work weekends. The power of this technique lies in its simplicity. You're not arguing, defending, or attacking. You're simply holding your position. Fourth, use what psychologists call the validate and redirect approach. This acknowledges their feelings without accepting their demands or distortions. I understand you're frustrated about the deadline change. That's challenging. The timeline I can commit to is, this technique works because it briefly gives them the attention they crave before returning to reality and reasonable boundaries. Finally, embrace the power of the pause. When a narcissist makes an unreasonable request or accusation, don't respond immediately. Take a beat, take a breath. In that pause, ask yourself, is this my responsibility? Is this factually accurate? Would I expect this from anyone else? That small pause prevents you from reacting out of habit or guilt. It gives you space to choose a response rather than fall into a reaction. These strategies aren't about winning arguments or changing the narcissist. They're about preserving your energy, maintaining your dignity, and staying focused on what matters. In our final section, we'll explore how to move beyond mere survival to actually thriving despite narcissistic relationships in your life. Because the ultimate goal isn't just to handle difficult people, it's to create an extraordinary life, regardless of who tries to hold you back. The ultimate victory over narcissistic influence in your life isn't just about managing their behavior. It's about reclaiming your own power and potential. This final part is about moving from survival to thriving. First, rebuild your internal compass after prolonged exposure to a narcissist. You may have lost touch with your own values, preferences, and instincts. Start making small decisions based on what you truly want. What book do you actually want to read? What restaurant do you genuinely enjoy? Reclaiming these small choices rebuilds your connection to yourself. I spoke with a woman who'd spent 12 years with a narcissistic husband. When I asked about her hobbies, she couldn't name a single one. Every free moment had been spent anticipating his needs. 6 months after implementing boundaries, she had discovered a passion for landscape photography. I didn't just reclaim my time, she told me. I reclaimed myself. Second, rebuild your support system. Narcissists often isolate their targets from friends and family who might interfere with their control. Reach out to one person this week. Reconnect with someone who knew you before this relationship took over. These connections are lifelines back to your authentic self. Third, practice radical self-compassion. You'll have moments of weakness where you fall back into old patterns. When this happens, speak to yourself as you would a good friend. You've been conditioned for years to respond this way. Of course, it takes time to change. What matters is that you recognized it and can choose differently next time. Fourth, focus on growth, not grievance. It's easy to become bitter after recognizing how a narcissist has affected your life. Don't let resentment become your new prison. Ask yourself, what have I learned from this experience? How has it made me stronger, wiser, more discerning? Every experience, even painful ones, can be transformed into wisdom when approached with the right mindset. Fifth, create a vision for your life that's so compelling that maintaining boundaries becomes the obvious choice. When you're clear about what you're moving toward, it's easier to protect your time and energy from those who would drain it. Remember, the best revenge against someone who tried to diminish you is to expand. Expand your skills, your joy, your impact, your connections. A client once asked me, "How will I know when I'm really free from my narcissistic mother's influence?" My answer was simple. When you make choices based on what you want for your future, rather than in reaction to your past. That's the ultimate freedom, to live forward rather than in response to old wounds. As we conclude, I want you to remember one thing. The fact that someone couldn't value you properly says nothing about your worth and everything about their limitations. Your value doesn't decrease because someone failed to see it. Stop being nice to those who use your kindness as a weapon against you. Instead, be committed to your growth, your peace, your potential, and to relationships that honor all three. The journey we've outlined isn't easy, but it leads to something precious, a life that's truly your own, shaped by your values rather than someone else's demands. That life is waiting for you. All you need to do is claim it.